Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today, I want to talk about something that sounds small but actually feels pretty big when you notice it. And that is hugging. More specifically, why Japanese families often don't hug very much, especially once the kids grow up. Now, before I start, of course, I know this is a generalization. Not every Japanese family is the same, not every Western family is the same, and culture is never as simple as all people do this or all people do that. But still, I've lived in both Japan and New Zealand, and this is one of those differences that I keep noticing again and again. And honestly, I think it's a really interesting one. Because in Japan, people often seem physically close in some ways, but emotionally or physically distant in others, including families. And in Western countries, it can sometimes be exact opposite. So let me explain what I mean. The other day, I suddenly realized just how different hugging culture is between Japan and places like New Zealand. In New Zealand, hugging is very normal. If you haven't seen someone in a while, you hug them. Even just within a few days, they still hug. If your friend is sad, you hug them. If you're leaving, you hug them again. Sometimes you even hug someone you've only met once or twice, or first time. And after living there for a while, that starts to feel normal, natural even. So then, when I go back to Japan, I kind of have this instinct to hug people, but I stop myself. Because in Japan, it just doesn't really happen in the same way. Even if you love the person, even if you miss them, even if you're genuinely happy to see them, you still usually don't hug. And I think that's so interesting because it doesn't mean Japanese people love each other less. Of course not. It's just that love and affection are shown differently. And I think that's something people outside Japan sometimes misunderstand. They may look at Japanese families and think, oh, maybe they're cold or maybe they're distant. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I think many Japanese people do care deeply. They just don't always express it through physical affection. And hugging is one of the clearest examples of that. For example, I have a lot of friends in Japan, people I genuinely love and care about, but when I go back to Japan after 6 months away, I still don't really hug them. In New Zealand, I probably would. I definitely would. Actually, I might even hug someone after not seeing them for like 2 days. You know? In some places, 2 days is enough to make people act like you just returned from war. Oh my god, it's been forever. A huge hug. Meanwhile, in Japan, you could come back after 6 months or a year, and the energy is more like, oh, you're back. Yeah, how was it? Good. And that's it. No dramatic reunion, no flying jump hug, no movie scene, just emotional restraint, very elegant, very Japanese. And honestly, I kind of love that too, but it's a big contrast. And I've always thought about this, especially when it comes to mothers and sons. I've often felt a little sorry for mothers with sons in Japan. And I don't mean that in a sexist way. I just mean that once boys hit a certain age, maybe around 12 or 13, hugging often seems to disappear completely. Actually, to be fair, daughters can be like that too. I know I was. When I was around 13, I was very rebellious. Very. There was absolutely no way I was gonna casually hug my mother. No chance. Even if she had asked, I would probably have reacted like she had suggested something deeply offensive or weird. Like, what? Hug? What the hell? That kind of age. And I think a lot of people go through that phase. But what feels different to me is that in many Western countries, even when teenagers go through that rebellious stage, hugging doesn't disappear in the same dramatic way. It might happen less often, sure. Teenagers are teenagers everywhere. They get embarrassed, they get moody, they act like their parents are ruining their lives by breathing too loudly. Nothing. That part seems universal. But even then, in many Western families, a hug is still possible. Maybe not every day, maybe not in public, maybe not with enthusiasm, but still possible. Whereas in Japan, once the door closes, it often feels very closed. Like, well, we had a good run. Physical affection ended in 2004. Thank you for your service. And then that's just how it stays. In fact, I think if a teenager in Japan openly hugged their parent in front of friends, some people might think it was strange. Not bad exactly, just unusual. Like, oh wow, your family does that? And maybe the friends would tease them a little. Not in a cruel way, maybe, but enough to make the person feel self conscious. So, in that sense, hugging still feels more like a Western thing to me. And it's not only about parents and children. Even with adult family members in general, hugging is just less common. That's why something that happened recently really stood out to me. The other day, I hugged my mom. And for context, I had been in New Zealand for months and then I came back to Japan and saw her again after about 6 months. So I thought, you know what? Maybe I should just hug her because I knew she had missed me and I missed her too. And also, maybe because I've been living in New Zealand, hugging felt more natural to me than it used to. So I gave her a hug. And my mom was so happy, like genuinely, visibly happy. And that kind of broke my heart a little because it made me realize wow, maybe she really wanted that. Maybe she missed that kind of affection more than I thought. At the end of my stay, she even told me that she had really loved it when I hugged her. And I thought, oh no, now I've started something. Now, every time I go back to Japan, I'm gonna be expected to provide emotional support and imported Western affection. And then something even funnier happened. Because apparently my mom enjoyed it so much that she asked my sister to hug her too. And my sister basically said, absolutely not. She was like, there's no way I'm doing that. This is Japan. I'm not suddenly going to start acting Western. And honestly, that was hilarious because my sister is already in her 30s. She's not a moody teenager, she's not in a rebellious phase, but she's still saying no. Not because she doesn't love her mom, just because that's not what we do. And I think that says so much. Sometimes culture is stronger than personality. Even if you're loving, even if you're kind, even if you're emotionally healthy, culture still shapes what feels natural and what feels awkward. And in Japan, for many people, hugging parents just feels awkward after a certain age, even if there's love there. Especially if there's love there, actually. Because then everyone gets embarrassed. That might be the most Japanese part. Now, with my dad, it's a little different. I honestly don't remember the last time I hugged him. Probably when I was 4 or 5. But I don't have the best relationship with my dad, so that may not be the best examples. Still, when I think about my friends too, most of them probably haven't hugged their parents since they were around 13 or 14 either. So I don't think this is just my family. It feels like a wider pattern. And here's the part I find especially interesting. Even though Japanese families often stop hugging once children become teenagers, Japanese parents and children may still sleep next to each other for a surprisingly long time compared to many Western families. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Because if you look at many Western countries, babies often start sleeping separately very early, sometimes even before they turn 1. They have their own room, their own bed, maybe their own sleep routine, and parents are trying to build independence from a very young age. But in Japan, it's much more common for parents and children to sleep close together, sometimes in the same room, sometimes right next to each other, sometimes until the child is much older. So, if you think about it, that creates a really interesting contrast. In the West, children may sleep separately very early, but then continue hugging their parents for years and years. In Japan, children may sleep physically close to their parents for much longer, but then at some point, hugging suddenly becomes weird. Isn't that strange? I think that's such an interesting cultural contradiction. Physical closeness in one way, physical distance in another. And maybe that shows that closeness itself means different things in different cultures. Maybe in Japan, closeness is less about open physical affection and more about presence, being there, doing things for each other, cooking for each other, sitting in the same room without saying much, quiet care. Whereas in some Western cultures, closeness may be expressed more directly, with hugs, with I love you, with visible affection. Neither is automatically better. They're just different languages of love. And I think sometimes people forget that, especially online, where people love to judge other cultures in very simple ways. Like, oh, that culture is cold, or that culture is too emotional, or that culture is distant. But real life is usually much more complicated than that. A Japanese mother may never hug her adult child, but wake up at 5 a.m. to make food for them. A Western parent may hug their child every day, but expect them to move out much earlier. So, which one is more affectionate? Honestly, I don't think it's that easy to answer. That's why I think this topic is interesting. Because hugging is not just about hugging, it opens the door to bigger questions about family, independence, embarrassment, emotional expression, and what love is supposed to look like. And maybe the real misconception is like this. Just because Japanese families don't hug much, it doesn't mean they don't love each other deeply. It may just mean they show it in ways that are less obvious to outsiders. Still, I have to admit, after hugging my mom, I did think maybe I should do it more often. Maybe I've been underestimating how meaningful that small gesture can be. Maybe after years of living outside Japan, I've started to see hugging differently. Or maybe I'm just becoming softer with age. Which is also possible. I don't know. Maybe in 10 years I'll be hugging everyone. Maybe I'll become one of those dangerous people who hugs too much. Maybe my whole family will start running away when they see me coming. Who knows? But for now, I do think it made my mom happy, so maybe that's reason enough. Anyway, that's my experience, but now I'm really curious about yours. What is hugging like in your culture? Do adults hug their parents? Do siblings hug each other? Do people stop hugging after a certain age? And if you're from outside the West, what is it like in your country? I'd especially love to hear from people in Asian countries because I'm curious whether this is mostly a Japanese thing or whether it's common in other parts of Asia too. And if you're from a Western country, tell me honestly, do people really hug that much? Or have I just been surrounded by unusually affectionate New Zealanders? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for listening and see you next time.